All right, now, everybody. Quiet, listen to me. We're going to start a show. Now, some of you people have been with me before. You know it's going to be a tough grind, but we're going to have a show.
Welcome to the Mark Thompson Show. It is Michael Shore sitting in for Mark yet again. I'm here with Kim and Tony, and we are going to have another good show. I really enjoy doing this. I enjoy the repartee. I regret, I really regret how angry I was when I would see Mayim Bialik hosting Jeopardy, because I really didn't like when she was hosting Jeopardy. And
why?
I should have been a little kinder from my character, because she was just standing in. Well, I just didn't think she was good enough. She was, I watched Jeopardy for so long that you just get into it. I actually now think Ken Jennings is better than Alex Trebek, which is controversial in its own right.
Oh, that is controversial.
Another conversation for another time. But just the guest host has a tough row to hoe, because everybody who watches every day generally likes the host. So anyway, you guys are great. Right? I'm enjoying this, and also I'm late because everybody wanted me to be late. It turns out. Part of the charm of the Mark Thompson Show is to make sure you're not punctual. So I hope I'm living up to that. Let's open with some sad news, really, as Luis here, who has donated $1.99 there to memorialize David Lynch and Bob Uecker, both the film director, producer, brought things such as Blue Velvet and Twin Peaks and the like, passed today. Sadly, so too did the 90-year-old Bob Uecker, who sort of transcended just having been an average baseball player, a superb baseball announcer, and being some kind of a celebrity. Here's Andre the Giant with Bob Uecker. And Bob Uecker made, turned self-deprecation into an industry for himself. And he was, by all accounts, everybody who worked with him thought he was terrific. He was, of course, a star of Major League. He did lots of commercials, but he took baseball very seriously, and he was beloved. Here, let's show them, Tony. This is a light beer commercial from sometime in the 70s or 80s. And
it's one of my bigger days. Let me buy a beer. Sure. These fans, I love them. When I came in, they didn't recognize me at first. But then when I told them who I was, next thing you know, they're buying me my favorite beer, light beer from Miller. They know us ex-big leaguers drink light because it's got a third less calories than their regular beer. It's less filling, and it tastes great. Thanks. Hey, it's a pleasure to buy a beer for a great pitcher like Whitey Ford. Hey, so I lied.
Light beer from Miller. Everything you want.
There he is. That's Bob being self-deprecating. I don't know if you guys caught it. The guy who bought him the beer, off there on the right, that's John Goodman. Who would go on to fame and fortune as a commercial he booked, I guess, at that time. So, pretty cool. And of course, I'm sure people know it was John Goodman right away. You didn't need to tell you that, but no, it's pretty great. And that is, that was Bob Uecker to a T, right? I mean, everybody talking up his own career and then telling them that he was Whitey Ford so that they would buy a beer. Anyway, so rest in peace, both of those interesting Americans who had interesting American lives. And that's how we start the show today, with that breaking news and 90 years of comedy from Bob Uecker. But, man, he was fun.
Yeah.
And David Lynch's stuff, a little out there, right? I mean, I wasn't accessible to everyone.
78. He was 78 years old. Of course, he was the creator of Twin Peaks, Mulholland Drive as well. And his family is posting today that he has passed away.
Yeah, I saw Blue Velvet and liked it, but it was one of those movies I think I said I liked so that I could be kind of, cool about it. I'm not sure that I got it completely when just one of those ones it's like no soap radio. You laugh along with it because you're supposed to. But I thought it was a good movie, I think, but I don't know that I understood it completely. But it was a long time. Erasure was interesting.
They didn't note his cause of death. I don't know what happened, but yeah, he was nominated 3 times for Academy Awards, and I don't think he ever picked one up. He didn't win, but three-time nominee.
Yeah, that's pretty cool, and both accomplished in film. Major, and Bob Uecker was on TV. He had his own sitcom, Mr. Belvedere. So yeah, there was some good careers. In any case, we move on to another career that ended last night. President Biden gave a farewell address, as presidents do, and in that address, Kim, while doing the normal things that one would do at the end of their career, and his was a long one. He was elected to the U.S. Senate in 1972 and had really been involved in politics every day since he began running for president. And he's been a fixture. Not just because he was a president, but he's a president that didn't come out of the blue. He'd been part of the political conversation for a long time, and he ended his political conversation last night. But the president had not just a look back. He had some, pointed, if not specific, things to look out for going forward. So from the Oval Office last evening, here is President Joseph Robinette Biden Jr.
This will be my final address to you from the American people, from the Oval Office, from this desk as president. And I've been thinking a lot about who we are, and maybe more importantly, who we should be. That's why my farewell address tonight. I want to warn the country of some things that give me great concern. This is a dangerous concentration, and that's a dangerous concentration of power in the hands of a very few ultra-wealthy people. The dangerous consequences if their abuse of power is left unchecked. Today, an oligarchy is taking shape in America of extreme wealth, power, and influence that literally threatens our entire democracy. I'm equally concerned about the potential rise of a tech industrial complex that could pose real dangers for our country as well. Americans are being buried under an avalanche of misinformation and disinformation, enabling the abuse of power. The free press is crumbling. Editors are disappearing. Social media is giving up on fact-checking. The truth is smothered by lies told for power and for profit. We must hold the social platforms accountable. Artificial intelligence is the most consequential technology of our time, perhaps of all time. But unless safeguards are in place, AI could spawn new threats to our rights, our way of life, to our privacy, how we work, and how we protect our nation. We must make sure AI is safe and trustworthy and good for all humankind. And as the land of liberty, America, not China, must lead the world in the development of AI. After 50 years of public service, I give you my word. I still believe in the idea for which this nation stands. A nation where the strength of our institutions and the character of our people matter and must endure. Now it's your turn to stand guard. May you all be the keeper of the flame. May you keep the faith. I love America. You love it too. God bless you all. May God protect our troops. Thank you for this great honor.
There he is, President Joe Biden last night, a farewell address. I love America. You love it too. But, the warnings that he issued, it was a big day for President Biden yesterday. It was, the ceasefire that begins Sunday, which is always weird to me, by the way, and we'll get back to that in a little bit, is how we'll have a ceasefire, but we can't do it just yet. Why can't it be like as of right now, right? We're going to start this ceasefire Sunday. Have at it until Sunday. But Sunday, the new rules are in place. That always fascinated me. But going back to President Biden, yesterday he really had a victory dance. It was one that he could have had in May had Netanyahu been more responsive and more willing to do that. And I think to the frustration of many who lost their loved ones in both places, and to the hostages and parents of hostages, and the whole notion of the fact that it took until now, but it did happen, and that's good. So yesterday he had that. Last night he had this speech. All the while, the Trump administration, the plans for the inauguration, the nomination confirmations are all happening, and President Biden comes out, gives this speech, and he talks about oligarchs. He talks about the power of tech billionaires. And what do we learn then? That sitting front and center next to Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, at the inauguration will be Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos, by the way, a tech billionaire, one of the richest people in the world as well, as is Zuckerberg. But Jeff Bezos is also the owner of the Washington Post. So the notion that the publisher of a political newspaper of record in this country that did such good journalism during the Trump years is now sitting front row at Trump's inauguration. I may be wrong, and somebody may find a picture of Ben Bradley sitting at the inauguration of Jimmy Carter, but I doubt it. I doubt that that's what this is about. And so it's really surprising to me that is happening. It shouldn't be surprising, and maybe it isn't surprising. Maybe it's just angering, and I'm euphemizing it, if that's a word. But it's yeah. And somebody, Blue Spark, just writes, funny, I don't remember seeing any of those three scumbags on my ballot. I say what you will about them. I don't know enough certainly about Zuckerberg and Bezos. I'm pissed at Bezos because of what he's done with the Washington Post, how he tried to influence the election by announcing that he's not going to influence the election and pulling the idea of endorsement and from the Washington Post before this last election. But Musk, I do put that label on in many ways. So, but it's just the fact that these guys are going to be there, and that Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, will be there as well. Not bothered as much by that. I don't know his politics. I know he's going to be going to the inauguration. Business leaders do go to inaugurations, but the featuring of Bezos and Zuckerberg there, and Zuckerberg's having an inauguration party alongside Elon Musk. I mean, it's all so upsetting, and it's exactly what Biden is talking about. And its roots can be traced in so many ways. But if we're going to beat China at AI, these people are going to be involved. But because they are the richest people in the world, what does it say about us? I mean, we've been talking about Vladimir Putin and the oligarchy in Russia and how distasteful it is, and how we tried to, after the war and the entry into Ukraine by Russian troops, we seized all their assets here. But these are the same types of people, right? I mean, yeah, we're not going into Ukraine, but I mean, yeah, somebody, right, Kathleen says the mask is off the tech bros. Yeah, the mask is off. Maybe we knew already that that's the way they were leaning. I didn't know that about Bezos and Zuckerberg, really, to be honest. But now they're kowtowing to somebody who fancies himself an emperor, and it's really, really upset. It is out in the open now. Some people are saying to boycott Facebook. I already do. I don't have Instagram or Facebook. I never have, and nothing is wooing me toward that. And for my books, I go to bookshop.org, or I go down the block and I buy my books. So Bezos, I would get some of my business, but he doesn't get my book business. And I don't know. This is, Kim, this is really one of the discomforting things. It's something that we knew, and maybe we're kind of dumb about it for not having just assumed that this was going to happen. But I didn't think it was this bad, I guess. Are you with me, Kim? I can't hear you, Kim. I think you're muted.
Sorry, I had muted myself. It hits me that all of these guys, well, at least we know Zuckerberg and Bezos and Musk and likely more, have kicked in $1 million to the inauguration fund. It feels like they're paying their way in to have influence on government. And if that's not an oligarchy, I don't know what is. The rich coming in, throwing their money around so that they can have influence in decision making. And that's not what America's supposed to be about. And I don't know why we're not fighting back more against that, because that is all wrong. That's not who we are, and it's not what we do.
But in a way, it is who we are, because and I'm not defending these guys, but in all inaugurations, since I've been alive, there are people that are donor party that give to the inauguration. They have parties. Sure. We all know that money buys power and influence in this country, and that's why Citizens United only made it worse, right? I mean, it's not like the rich didn't have their favors granted before Citizens United, but it really it bastardized the whole process even more. It made it spread, and it's super upsetting to see that influence. Now, it's also, there's something, and this, I don't know if it makes a difference to everybody. John just said, I wish the Democrats would suck up to the rich. I'm sure you do, John, but I got to tell you something. They do. The Democrats suck up to the rich as well. Everybody does, because you got to bring guns to a knife fight. You got to a gunfight, not knives. And the Democrats, they have their money as well. I don't think, though, that the blatantness of this and the blatancy of it is the same. The individuals themselves are something that Donald Trump wants to be around. Democrats often will try and distance themselves from it. Maybe it's less honest in a way, right? Distance themselves from the fact that that they're kowtowing to the rich in order to support their ideas. So it's difficult to dissect that. But what I will say is the difference between, and Kim was talking about this as well, is the influence of the rich that they have with Citizens United and with Donald Trump. Trump's a billionaire. Like, people are giving money to a billionaire. Donald Trump could throw his own damn party. And that is, to me, a big difference in all of this. And Donald Trump raising money and having people give money to Donald Trump, to me, is so tasteless. Not just because of who he is, but because of what he already has. His legal defense fund, for example, you had billionaires giving money to Donald Trump's legal defense fund. He got himself in trouble, and he could have afforded to defend himself like rich people do. And there are, Karen says, my husband insists that both political parties take money from the same corporations and the rich. I guess so. Yeah. I mean, not always the same. There are corporations and there are CEOs of companies that give equally to both parties, donate, both to play both sides of the fence, but to help out in the process, I suppose, and to look even-handed. But that's not what we're looking at here necessarily. I'm sure if you go through Jeff Bezos on the SEC or the FEC websites to look for who he's given money to, that he's given to Democrats and he's given to Republicans. But the trend toward Trump lately from people who are terrified of him and what he will do to their companies is really sickening. And that's what you're seeing in the front row of this inauguration.
It really is. I mean, it really is, because they are bending a knee. They are trying to give money and kowtow to Trump, probably because they're trying to get better regulations, trying to make more money. I don't know, Michael Schur, why it feels different. And you mentioned that this, America's always been for sale in a way, right? Yeah. Why does it feel more now that it's for sale? Is it because these guys are front and center at the inauguration? Is it because they're coughing up $1 million to the inauguration fund? Is it because they're all together like this, that it feels more like a group of them coming forward to be? Why does it feel more egregious, I guess?
I think that's part of it, but I think also because it didn't matter, right? I mean, so you would talk to Trump voters about the influence of money and the billionaires, and these people are, these are not wealthy Americans voting for Trump and waiting outside his rallies, and they're being fooled and they don't care. And once the people that are supporting you don't care, you just keep doing it. And I think Trump found out that the people weren't bothered by it. So he did it. And like he does everything else, he gilds it in gold and puts an exclamation point on it. And so he has them at the inauguration, and he has all of them. He makes Elon Musk a big part of his administration. It's offensive to a lot of people, but because it's naked and because people aren't standing up to it and because he won, he thinks he can do it with reckless abandon, and I guess he can, right? Because it didn't it didn't hurt him. It only helped him. And these wealthy people are just like, we talked all week, guys, about Joni Ernst, right? How she is a female veteran senator, a victim of sexual assault and harassment, who is voting for Pete Hegseth, who has allegedly committed those things, who has allegedly raped someone, and who has positions about women in the military that are very, very backward, because she was afraid of being primaried, most likely in Iowa, because there were threats that if people don't support Pete Hegseth, and other nominees, they're going to be primaried. Well, it's the same thing with Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, right? They're afraid that Trump's going to come in and crack down on their industries. But if they support him, they're going to get a little bit of relief. They're going to get tax breaks. They're going to get non-competes. They're going to get all the things that they want just for supporting this guy. It's what kings do. And, it's like monopolies. The palace, the royal family would issue a monopoly in England, and you would be the only person that could make strawberry jam because you had that monopoly. Well, that's what they're going for here. And in a way, it's not exactly, obviously, but that's what's at stake here. And this is, Donald Trump talks a lot about William McKinley. William McKinley was a little known president at the end of the 19th century. And he was an industrialist. He favored the moneyed classes and the bankers. And he created bricks that a lot of people think led to, the rise of at that time, multimillionaires at the turn of the century. He was sorry about that. Sorry. We'll stop the dogs for they've stopped now. But Donald Trump liking William McKinley is the most random thing in the world, because I'm sure he couldn't name his 45 predecessors. But William McKinley was a president who, like Trump, favored the moneyed class. And you see that there. And if you do a little research after the show, you can't get more boring than William McKinley, other than he was assassinated in Buffalo, and it led to Teddy Roosevelt becoming president. I don't think that's William McKinley, but we just had a picture of him. I hope I'm wrong. But in any case, so there is a fascination with giving the power to the wealthy, and that's really something that we're seeing with Donald Trump, and we're going to have to endure for 4 years and more, right? Because J.D. Vance is someone who is tight with Silicon Valley. That's why he was, one of the favorites of the Trump sons to become the vice president, because he's somebody who could take that money, get that money in an enduring way. And it's kind of wild, but it's the reality we're living. Let me tell you a little bit about today's show. We have Mark Thompson, one of our correspondents, did an interview with Thom Hartmann that we're going to be airing shortly. We have David Katz in the next hour, who's going to talk to us a lot about politics, about the law, but about Pam Bondi, who's going to be Attorney General, I hope. We can talk a little bit more later, too, about the confirmation hearings that continue to go on, and we'll get to all that. But now I think it's going to be, we're talking about oligarchy now. Mark and Tom had an interview yesterday, had a conversation yesterday where they talked about those same themes before the president even came on the air and talked to us, the American people, about oligarchy. So either the president watched this interview with Mark and Tom, or their timing and prescience was very appreciated, or will be, by this audience. So here's Mark Thompson talking to Thom Hartmann.
The Mark Thompson Show.
You know something? If you know me, you know how much I hold Thom Hartmann in the highest regard. If there is a Mount Rushmore for progressive broadcasters, those who articulate sound, clear takes on progressive politics, Thom Hartmann would definitely be up there. He's an international bestseller. He's a broadcaster who reaches, I had no idea, 500 million homes worldwide. And he's been good enough to occasionally stop through this world. How about it for Thom Hartmann, everybody? Hello, sir.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah.
Great to see you again.
It's great to see you always. And I watch the total takeover of our government by a bunch of mega rich guys. I watch that and I think back to a book that you did. Is it the American History of the American History of the American Oligarchy? What was it, Tom? The book you did?
Hidden History of American Oligarchy.
Hidden History. Your Hidden History series is just terrific. And so that Hidden History of American Oligarchy, along with some of your other writings, touch on this possibility that our democratic republic could indeed be captured by the wealthiest people on earth. It appears that that's happening, and they all have fealty to Donald Trump. So as I saw this happening in slow motion, of course, it's really slow motion. We've seen the Musk orbit and the Bezos orbit and the Zuckerbergs and the way that they have gone to Mar-a-Lago and bent at the knee to this guy. But they're obviously going to extract something from him. I thought, gosh, I'd love to have a few minutes to talk to you about what's happening in American government right now.
Yeah, well, this is not new. This is something that we saw in ancient Rome. The richest guy in Rome, his name was Marcus Licinius Crassus, basically was offended by the free bread for all welfare state of democratic Rome. Rome was democratic for about 500 years. And he funded, just political gridlock, the Roman equivalent of Newt Gingrich, to create basically warfare within the Roman Senate. And this led to popular discontent. It led to the rise of populism. And ultimately, it led to Julius Caesar crossing the Rubicon River and seizing Rome. And, just a few years later, when Augustus Caesar took over, that was just the end of 500 years, half a millennia of Roman democracy. And I think that we are damn close to a very similar point right now. In fact, I was just writing about that for tomorrow's Hartmann Report newsletter. Great minds think alike here, Mark.
What does that look like in the modern age then?
Well, it looks like oligarchy typically and classically does, which is basically rule by the rich for the rich. It's when the resources and assets of the nation, including its labor force and its taxpayers, are redirected towards serving a small group of oligarchs, essentially. The problem with oligarchy, and I get into that in some detail in the book, the big problem with oligarchy, and we've flirted with it in this country 3 times now, by the way. One led to the Civil War. One led to the kind of eruption in the 1890s with the Sherman Antitrust Act and whatnot that carried on through the Teddy Roosevelt and William Howard Taft administrations. And then the third one was, at the end of at the beginning, I guess, the Republican Great Depression with the rise of FDR, ending the oligarchs and putting them back in their place. And now we're in this fourth kind of tranche of it. But the big problem with oligarchy is that it's a transitional form of government. Oligarchy is not stable. It rarely lasts more than a generation. And the reason why is because people get pissed off. Hey, the rich guys are getting everything and I'm getting screwed. I mean, that just becomes the consensus opinion. And so they start demanding change. And typically oligarchies flip in one of 2 directions. Either like America has 3 times now, they flip back to democracy, or like Hungary has done and India is doing and the Philippines did. And I mean, I could give you a dozen examples, Egypt, et cetera. They flip into tyranny. And we're at that, we're on that knife's edge right now.
It's interesting because the door to the tyranny we've seen kicked open by the MAGA faithful and by Trump as their leader. And the oligarchs have sort of drafted on that. They've found their way through Trump. And so these 2 things coexist, but as you describe it, they merge. And so the authoritarian tendencies of Trump and the like, they may be well served in a sense by the oligarchical takeover of our government.
Well, we now have a Caesarist movement within the GOP. It was really started, I think you could argue, by Curtis Yarvin, 15 years ago or so, the philosopher king who J.D. Vance is a big follower of,
right.
Who actually openly called for it. And although his original take was that FDR and Lincoln and Washington were kind of Caesarists, strong men who got things done, and that's what we need. And now, Kevin Roberts, the head of the Heritage Foundation, is another one of these big Caesarists. I mean, these guys are calling basically for strongman rule. They think that that's the only thing. I mean, we've had 25, 30 years now of gridlock and political warfare funded by right-wing billionaires and acted out by the GOP, initially with Newt Gingrich making, the destruction of norms, of reasonable behavior among politicians and things like that. And the concentration of both wealth and power in an increasingly small number of hands. So we're there.
You saw Newt Gingrich sort of become patient zero in creating the contagion that was the hyper-partisan Washington and the virtue in that. But this rise of the oligarchy seems supercharged by social media and the new media environment. And obviously there's one of those oligarchs who's Elon Musk, who has been, who took over X, certainly got his money's worth, and now may be granted TikTok. I mean, I don't know to what extent he'll have buy-in on that, but the notion of sort of a monopolization of these social media platforms, it's gone away. I mean, Zuckerberg as well, with his control of Facebook and Instagram. I mean, these are massive platforms with tremendous influence.
Yeah, and if you post right-wing memes on those platforms, they get radically and quickly amplified. And if you post left-wing or even just pro-democracy memes, they get suppressed. I've been arguing for some time, as does, ironically, Josh Hawley. He wrote a book about this, as did I. Mine was The Hidden History of Big Brother, that those algorithms should be public. They should be required to publish them. If they're going to manipulate the data that we're seeing, we should at least know the dimensions of them and parameters of the manipulation. And that's not even, that's a modest ask. I mean, frankly, I agree with Josh Hawley that we should just do away with Section 230 of the Telecommunications Act that granted these guys, an end to liability. Right now, if you were to publish in the New York Times or the Washington Post or on CNN or MSNBC or ABC or any other main media outlet, or even on my newsletter, some of the things that show up on Twitter or Facebook or whatnot, you'd be in a whole world of trouble. You could be sued. And these guys are immune from lawsuits because of this one little provision in law in 1996 that everybody from Bill Clinton and Al Gore on the one hand to the Bill Gates and the emerging kind of tech bros believed, and Republicans for that matter, believed would kick off the internet and launch a golden age of everybody having information and everybody having access to the world's knowledge. And it was a great idea, but its time has come and gone. I mean, it's time for Section 230 to go away. And
I'll give them credit for that goal, meaning I'll give them credit for sincerity in that goal. I think now all this stuff is wrapped in some BS goal, and yet the steam engine just keeps picking up more and more steam. And I just also think, Tom, they've successfully, and through the weaponization of some of these things and platforms that you've talked about, created a demonization of immigrants, and they've created the otherness that has, in a way, thrown so many Americans off the scent of what you're talking about, off the scent of the complete takeover of government. Yeah, it's, again, these are the classic weapons of Caesarists or, strongman type, people who aspire to strongman kind of authoritarian power. Is first you've got to have an enemy. I mean, one of the things I was surprised when I learned this. I was in my 20s and I wanted to write novels, and I've written like 7 or 8 of them. They're just terrible. Two made their way into print, but don't bother reading them. But I took a class. Louise and I took a remarkable class on novel writing back at the Maui Writers Conference, and the guy said, your hero is not the most important character in your book. Everybody thinks he is or she is, but that's absolutely not the case. The villain is the most important character. Superman would just be a boring guy who stopped people from sticking up 7-Elevens if it wasn't for Lex Luthor,
right? Batman would just be some rich guy who drives around in a fancy car in a funny outfit if it wasn't for the Joker. You've got to have a supervillain in order to have a superhero. So every throughout history, I mean, again, going back to Julius Caesar, throughout history, every wannabe dictator, every wannabe authoritarian always starts out by creating an other that they can point to and saying, that's the supervillain. And, you know, we've got several candidates right now that the Republican Party has offered us, immigrants, trans people, the queer community in general, Black people. You know, there's a few, Muslims. There's a few, but typically they settle on one big one. And Trump has been riding the immigrant one for some time. We'll see how this shakes out over the course of the next 2 years. But,
you know, your latest book, I think, in that Hidden History series is The Hidden History of the American Dream. Yeah. And I'm just wondering to what extent what's going on now affects so much of what you speak about in that book, about economic progress and economic setbacks and the concentration of wealth, et cetera.
This is the key to understanding the popularity of Donald Trump. When I was a kid, my father bought a house in 1957. I was 6 years old. He bought the house that I grew up in for $13,000. He was earning $7,500 a year working in a tool and die shop. Back then, the average cost of an American house was twice the average annual salary. Today, the average annual salary for one person, the household salary is higher, but for one person is around $40,000, $43,000, I think it is. And the average cost of a house in the United States is $435,000. It's now 10 to 1. So, you know, there's been this explosion of unaffordability, number one. Number two, when my generation, the boomers, were in our 30s, we controlled 21.5% of all the wealth in America. The generation today in their 30s control 4.6% of all the wealth in America. So the Zoomers and the millennials have been screwed, and they know they've been screwed. They just don't know how or by whom. You know, obviously it was Reagan and Reaganism, you know, which we've had now for 40 years. And Democrats bought into this too. I mean, you know, the Clinton administration as well, just kind of continuing these policies. So the foundation of the American dream, you know, my dad working in a tool and die shop was able to buy a house. He bought a new car every 2 years. He took a vacation for 2 weeks every year, and we traveled around. He retired with a good pension. He was able to put his kids through school. He raised, you know, I was the oldest of 4 boys, you know, and it was a small house. I mean, it was a little 3-bedroom house, 1 bathroom, but it was still, I mean, we thought it was great, you know, it was kind of lower middle class. And you could do that. And today you can't have the 1970s or certainly the 50s or 60s standard of living with even 2 incomes. It takes 2.3 incomes to match the standard of living that you had in 1980 with a single income. And again, you can track this all back to Republican policies, but that connection is almost never made in the media. And certainly the Republicans aren't going to tell you that.
Sure. And I recommend that book, and we're going to have a link to it. The Hidden History of the American Dream it's just Thom Hartmann's latest. Speaking of latest, want to get you to weigh in on what's happening in Washington. It's a remarkable thing. It's the capture in a different way. It's the capture of the GOP completely, and it would seem 100% or close to it, close enough to it, for the GOP to capture government in this confirmation process that plays out the supplication of these GOP senators to Trump to the point that they're ready to rubber stamp any and all choices and nominees. I mean, the Hegseth nomination, the Bondi nomination, Patel, et cetera. But in Hegseth, you have a guy who is so manifestly incompetent and not up to the task. I'm just talking about, I'm leaving aside his sexual assaults and his drunkenness in the workplace, and the guy's a train wreck. I'm leaving that all out. He's going to run the Department of Defense. It's insane. And yet he is good looking, and he hosted this Fox News show on the weekends that I guess Trump saw enough of, and he said the right things to the point that Trump feels he's my guy. But more to the point I'm making and asking you about, these senators, it would seem the advise and consent part of this game, of the confirmation process, is completely gone.
Yeah, we've seen a complete breakdown of the Republican Party. It has turned from a political party where you have dialogue and debate and a variety of viewpoints into a cult. And where your word fealty, just a complete loyalty, and the utter debasement, the utter humiliation of Joni Ernst yesterday, in the hearings with Pete Hegseth, I think is the iconic moment that tells us that all is lost essentially for the GOP.
Yeah, spend a moment on Joni Ernst, because here's someone who is a victim of sexual assault herself. Served in the military. I mean, there's so much, and more to the point, maybe, she's their canary in the coal mine. I think other GOP senators kind of look to her, and the minute she gets she gives them the nod or the wink, they think, oh, well, if Joni's okay with this, I mean,
yeah.
Right?
And what happened apparently was that Elon Musk created a super PAC or a PAC, poured $20 million into it, if the news reports are right, and ran ads in her state, in Iowa, saying, Pete Hegseth is a wonderful guy. He's an American patriot, and some people are trying to prevent him. And call this number now. And of course, it was Joni Ernst's number, and she just got slammed. I mean, it's the same way that he bought the election for Donald Trump. So here we have now a Republican Party that lives in terror, frankly, of this strongman who has come right out and said he will politically destroy any Republican who stands up to him. He will primary them, which is the end of their political career. And he clearly has the power and means to do it. And with Musk's money behind him, and all the other billionaire money that's out there now, that's all flowing into Washington, D.C. I don't see how anybody can stop him within the Republican Party anyway.
It's funny, when the Gates nomination never really made it, I thought, maybe it's possible there'll be pushback on a handful. And most presidents get the majority of their nominations through, of course, but these are so extraordinary. And the Hegseth is an insanely, incompetent, to use the word again, but extreme might be another word I'd use, example of someone who is just really like out of bounds. And so maybe there'll be pushback on that. But now that I'm seeing Hegseth likely getting the nod, I'm thinking Patel is going to end up running the FBI, even though, he couldn't find the men's room at the FBI. And you have these other Gabbard and RFK Jr., et cetera. They may all get through, Tom.
I think they will. I frankly think they will. I think Gates was an anomaly, and it had to do with his, porking an underage girl. That was just a bridge too far for the Republicans. Trump got one sacrificial lamb there taken out. But I fully expect all of them to get through. And this is exactly what Vladimir Putin wants. He wants a dysfunctional American government. He wants a crippled American government. He wants an American intelligence service, run by somebody who's friendly with him. He wants Americans not to believe in their country and in their government, not to have faith in it. And the big question in my mind is Donald Trump doing this sort of thing because he's afraid of Putin? Is he doing it because he's been paid off by Putin? Is he being blackmailed by Putin? Will we reach a point? I mean, he's a lame duck president now, or will be next week, where he no longer can run for office, although, he might get the Constitution changed, God only knows. But he'll be 82 in 4 years. So is he going to suddenly be willing to stand up to Putin? I mean, it'll be interesting to see. Or is this just all coincidental that the desires of a strong man running Russia run parallel to the desires of a man who wants to be the strong man running America? I think all those things are possible.
I mean, he does seem oddly in the thrall of Putin, to the point that, when he was standing up next to him during his first term, and there was that question about Russian interference, he was ready to go with with Putin's take on Russian interference in the election as opposed to the intelligence agencies. That's just one example, but I'm just saying he's shown this odd allegiance either to Putin talking points or to Putin himself. We come from California, and a lot of our audience is in California, and I really wanted to get your take on a desperate situation in California. We lost our home and neighborhood to fire in 2019. We are on constant alert. I mean, it's crazy to even sustain the kind of anxiety we've had to sustain over the last week or so. But leave us aside, many other Californians are going through the same thing. And in Southern California, we've seen the devastation, and we have an expressed need for federal assistance. Enter Donald Trump and an opposing political party and the kind of bizarre relationship that he seems to demand from those who want something from him. I wonder if you can speak to that, because the GOP has also said, well, we want to see some strings attached to anything we give to California. There's always this, I understand political grandstanding around this, but if you could give me your take on how you see this unfolding, because this is an American tragedy being played out here, and the federal government, and by the way, California pays more into the federal government than any of these states that these senators are squawking from. You know, they're all welfare states. We're the ones who are actually contributing, and now we need something, and they're going to make us jump through hoops. Can you speak to that, please?
Yeah, I think it's a crime, and I was going to mention that Mike Johnson, who's from Louisiana, they get over $2 for every dollar that they send to the federal government. California gets less than $1 for every dollar it sends to the federal government. I didn't realize you'd lost your home, Mark. I'm so very sorry. It's got to be just a deeply traumatic experience. I've been trying to have some empathy, trying to understand, try to imagine what it would be like. And every time I get close to seriously imagining it happening to me, it just scares the hell out of me, and I back away from it. I mean, it's just.
Well, I would say running for your life and is a really it's intense.
Yeah.
Evacuating for your life, and we've done it over and over and over again. We pre-evacuated on this one. I'm smiling because it's so bizarre. We weren't threatened by any immediate flames, but the winds alone panic us so much that I literally got an Airbnb miles from my home in mid-city Los Angeles, around the concrete. I mean, you wouldn't walk outside in the area that we're in, but we're happy there because it's safe and we can at least sleep at night. So that's the reverberation psychologically. But the politics of it, it's just despicable the way it's being played out in Washington. And I'm wondering to what extent they really might hold up funding for California.
Well, Trump held up funding for, I think on 6 different occasions, he held up funding for blue states and Puerto Rico during his last term in office. And in some cases, he held up funding for months at a time. So I take him seriously. I take them absolutely seriously. They are going to demand their pound of flesh. These are people who don't believe in the democratic process. They don't believe in American democracy. They don't believe in federalism. They don't believe in the distribution of power in society. They are absolute monarchists, essentially, or Caesarists, or fans of oligarchy anyway. And so this is going to be a battle, but it's just obscene that they're even discussing it. I just, when I heard Mike Johnson say that, I was frankly astonished.
It's rich too from Johnson, because you mentioned Louisiana, and that is a state so full of corruption, with federal dollars be going to all these pockets of corrupt officials, never even makes it into any of the rebuild effort. I just think it's always rich when a Louisiana politician lectures me about strings attached to money.
Yeah, or morality, or
yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm with you.
It's only another minute or two that we have with you. I'm just wondering, give us a guide to survivability for those of us who, hope for the best and fear the worst.
I think the most important lesson, we have the benefit of hindsight. We can look at other countries that have been through this, whether it's Germany back in the day, or whether it's Hungary right now, or Russia, and learn the lessons of that. We're very fortunate to have people like Timothy Snyder and Ruth Ben-Ghiat, the contemporary chroniclers, doing the work that William Shearer did, in my father's generation with the rise and fall of the Third Reich. And so we have a much better understanding of where things are likely going to go, and what weapons and tools will be used, and how to fight back. And the main way to fight back is through the channels of public dialogue. And that's why, of course, the billionaires have been so anxious to control those. social media is arguably the largest one now. We find that people who get most of their news from social media were 20% more likely to vote for Donald Trump in the last election than people who get their news from mainstream media. And had it not been for social media, I think you could build a strong case that Trump would not be, coming into the White House, and not even close.
100%. I totally agree. I mean,
so,
yeah. So go ahead. I'm sorry. I mean,
so
yeah.
even though we're shoveling sand on the shore with a teaspoon here against the tide of these massive algorithms and these billionaires, I think that we have to do everything we can in whatever venues we can to be as loud as we can, and speak out and get engaged, show up at your local Democratic Party, volunteer, become a precinct committee person, join some of the great groups out there. Indivisible is probably the best known, but there's a bunch of them. Find one that follows your passion, and now is the time. It may be too late a couple of years from now to get politically active. Now is the moment.
Last thing, Tom, say that which you're speaking of, which is make your voice heard. I think Trump does want to be popular in his own way, and if there's enough noise around certain issues, he is capable of changing his position. We certainly know he's capable of changing his position, but I mean, of backing off something that he finds is costing him in terms of popularity. And so I know it's a noisy environment, but man, that's all the more reason that noise has to be made, I think.
You're absolutely right. And Claudia Sheinbaum, the president of Mexico, really demonstrated this. He picked on half a dozen countries, right? And she was the only one who stood up and gave him a bloody nose. She just punched back. She called him names. She made fun of him. And he just backed off. He hasn't said a word about Mexico since she took him down. So, yeah.
He had that same relationship with Nancy Pelosi, as I recall. He kind of respected her. And he said as much.
I think he feared her. I don't think Trump is capable of respecting women.
No, probably true, too. Look, the Hidden History series is terrific, and you should check it out. The latest is The Hidden History of the American Dream. We'll have a link to it under this video. And, of course, Thom Hartmann, the Hartmann Report, and ThomHartmann.com has a bunch of different links to all of Tom's work. Look, I put up the bat beam maybe once a month or so to try to see if I can get you through, and I'll probably do it again because we really enjoy our time with you. I just think you're a truth teller, my friend. Thank you. Yeah, anytime. It's always an honor and pleasure to hang out with you. Thank you for inviting me. Thom Hartmann, everybody. So long, Tom.
The Mark Thompson Show.
We're back. Can we hear me?
Yeah, we are.
Can we hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, good. Well, we've done a little bit of a setup with the help of Tony. I don't know if it's better, but let's ride it until it isn't.
Yeah, it sounds good. You sound good.
Okay, good. Something's going to become of him. But again, they were talking about oligarchy at a time when that's what we're talking about. It's a time where we are just days from an inauguration. We're seated on the front portico of the west front of the Capitol. Will be some of the richest people in the world watching a billionaire get inaugurated to the presidency for the second time. And it's an extraordinary thing. So that's why it's interesting to hear about Thom Hartmann's take and Mark's question about what it is that we can do, because one of them, I think it was Tom, who said it's really shoveling or taking teaspoons of sand to clear a beach. And I'm paraphrasing, but it's what it feels like. And it does get very, very frustrating when you're running uphill. And yes, the Ruth Ben-Ghiats are great, and the people that are chroniclers of these eras, they're great. But in a moment, that's not what you think about. You think about, damn it, what can I do? What's going to happen? Is this change forever? I think hearing what Hartmann said about oligarchy being temporary because people are fed up with it is encouraging, that it usually only lasts a generation. I think things that lasted a generation previously, expire more quickly now because our news cycles are quicker, our digestion, our protest, it all happens a lot faster than it did previously at times when things took a generation. I hope that's, we've talked a lot about optimism this week. I hope that's not just my optimism, but I do think that there is something sort of socially conditional about it now that has changed a lot. So we move on from that. We're going to be joined shortly by David Katz. A couple of things I want to talk about is what's happening today. We haven't talked about the fires, a little bit of political news. Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, has named Ashley Moody, the attorney general in that state, to take the seat of Marco Rubio. When Rubio is undoubtedly confirmed, he will sail through. There are some that just sail through with bipartisan support. His will be one of those. So when he's confirmed to the Secretary of State job, then they will have, then Ashley Moody, the Republican there, will be the senator. A lot of members of Congress, particularly Byron Donalds and Michael Waltz, who's going to the cabinet, but his name was even talked about in the Senate at one time. Members of Congress from Florida wanted that position. But DeSantis also knows the very narrow margins in the House right now and didn't want to mess with that. He named Ashley Moody, who many thought would be running for governor in 2 years anyway. So it'll be a 2-year term. She would have to run if she wanted to keep that seat for the rest of the Rubio term, which would expire in 28, and then run again. So there are 2 elections facing that person, or she'll run for governor in 26 and someone else will serve out the last 2 years of that Senate seat. Then one other piece of political news is yesterday, Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, and I found this particularly interesting. He relieved Michael Turner from Ohio as chairman of the Intelligence Committee.
Saw that. That's interesting, isn't it?
Well, what was most interesting, yes, it is interesting, and it doesn't happen a lot.
He wasn't MAGA enough, Michael Schur.
He wasn't.
You got to be full on MAGA or you're out, buddy.
He was very pro-NATO. He was very pro-supporting Ukraine. And the most interesting thing, which was just something that I picked up on, was Mike Johnson said, this isn't coming from Trump, this is coming from the House. Never before have I heard a speaker sound weaker in advance of a president. I mean, usually the speaker says, it's a decision I made, and a decision I made because we have to shake things up in the House, et cetera, et cetera. Never even offering that the White House would have influenced what the speaker was doing. Speakers of the House generally tend to be, they want to do what the White House wants, but they tend to try and rule their own roost and keep it separate from the White House. And I was astonished to hear Mike Johnson say that, actually, and that to have to say, hey, I wasn't being pushed around here. This was my idea, which made me, of course, think this wasn't his idea. But that's enough for another time.
I thought that was interesting. And it comes on the same day that Trump said he won't be hiring anyone associated with Haley, the Cheneys, any GOP critics. And so at the same time, Trump is saying, you got to be extra MAGA. Mike Johnson is saying, you have to be extra MAGA. And I guess the takeaway for me is at least they're on the same page. That Mike Johnson is really in line. He's stepping in line.
Yep, there's no question about it. And I think that, again, having Trump support Mike Johnson for even though it was at the very last moment, come in and endorse Mike Johnson for Speaker, that made a huge difference to Johnson, and it spoke to the influence that Trump has. I've said it before, that influence will wither. I believe it will, because I believe a lame duck president is a lame duck president, and everybody who has the ability to act on ambition, which is everybody in Congress, will see that they don't need to kowtow to somebody who's going to be punching their dance card and be done. I really do think that it's going to change, but not immediately. And I think that in order to get where you want to go right now, they've got to be MAGA, they've got to be devoted to Trump, but there will be people over the next couple of years who sort of try and carve their way away from that, and it's not going to happen immediately. But for now, just to see what happened with Mike Turner was kind of incredible. The other piece of news, because we haven't talked about the fires today, the Palisades fires 22% contained, and the Eaton fires 55% contained. There's a really interesting article in the New York Times today about what the Black community in Altadena that took years to build up and has been entrenched there now for a while, how they've suffered. It was considered, I think the Times said this, a Black haven. It's worth a read. It was on the front page of the paper, but I'm sure it's easily found in the online paper, about the effects of what's happening to neighbors and neighborhoods. The frustration now, not necessarily the fear of further fire, but going back into people not being able to have access to their homes has been obviously frustrating, but they're doing it for safety and safety alone. As a matter of fact, there was a home in the Palisades that survived the fire, but then fell because of a mudslide that was due to the fire. The earth, it was really an earth slide, not mud, because there hasn't been rain, but like the earth gave way, and that home went down a hill tragically. I mean, so it's not done, right? And it's not done with wind, it's not done with fire. There are still embers smoldering, and the Hearst and the Auto fire are very much under control, in the 90th percentile of control, I believe, for both those fires. But Palisades only at 22, which is it's not enough, and that's why people aren't being let back into their homes. Now the other issue becomes that LA is going to be hosting the Olympics, and there's a lot of talk about, is the infrastructure, is the money going to be able to be spent on the Olympics when they have to rebuild so much of the city, and that's going to be something that the Trump administration's actually going to have to be a part of dealing with. And it'll be interesting to see someone who does not love LA except when he needs to use it as an ATM in Donald Trump to come back and have to deal with fixing Los Angeles. But it's going to be something he definitely has to deal with.
There's that house in Southern California that survived the fire in Palisades on a cliff overlooking the ocean, only to be torn down by the mudslide, the one you just mentioned.
Yeah, it's just terrible. It's hard to see so much of it. And a friend of mine who's a cameraman, a news cameraman for the BBC, who I spoke to, I haven't seen him yet out here, but he's been working constantly. He said it's like a moonscape, and he's been to earthquakes and disasters all over the world for the BBC. And he said that Los Angeles is like a moonscape when you're up in those ruins, and that really sort of, we've heard of Armageddon and apocalypse and post-war and all of that, but hearing moonscape was really, I don't know, it made me think that because it does have that gray patina that we sort of associate with the moon.
There was speaking of the fires and also the confirmation hearings, as you've been mentioning, the energy pick that Trump tapped, his name is Chris Wright. And he commented yesterday, I think it was yesterday, that linking wildfires to climate change is total hype.
Right.
This is what he said. He's facing criticism now for disputing the ties between climate change and the more severe wildfires. He said it at his confirmation hearing on Wednesday. Alex Padilla, the senator from California, challenged Wright over his past comments calling wildfire concerns hype and dismissing their connection to climate policies. So I guess we can expect that from the Trumpies, right?
We are. That's what we got now, right? I mean, denier is going to deny, and how long will they continue to deny something that science has said? Well, we've seen it. We've seen it with vaccines. We've seen it, and we see it now with climate in a much more pronounced way. I mean, the number of scientists that disagree with the fact that there's global warming is, it's teeny, right? I mean, there are people who had problems with vaccines, but even though science and medicine said that they were okay, that's a totally different conversation. So look, we have a skeptical nation when it comes to our governance, which is probably a good thing. But when we talk about science, being skeptical about science when it is so overwhelming, and then what it does to our people, just for the sake of protecting fossil fuel industry, it's really obscene. It's obscene. And that's what, people like Scott Wright are going to do. If Jennifer Granholm, if this happened 2 years ago and Jennifer Granholm was there, she would be talking about how it has the ties to climate change and why we needed the Green New Deal and why we need to be part of the Paris accords and why we need to do more and hold people accountable. And that's changing now, and that's what happens.
Since you're speaking of the fires, here's a bright spot. State Farm is saying now that it will be offering renewals to residential policyholders affected by these deadly wildfires across Los Angeles. I don't think anyone really expected State Farm to renew these policies, but because we knew they had plans to drop a bunch of policies, but they say that this applies to policies held by homeowners, owners of rental properties, residential community associations, condo associations. And Ricardo Lara, who's the California Department of Insurance Commissioner, is applauding the decision by State Farm for answering his call, he says, and setting the tone for all insurance companies to follow. We'll see if all insurance companies really follow. I don't hold out hope.
Well, several people who got non-renewal notices in California say State Farm's really, that's an exceptional thing they've done, because they had announced they were pulling out of California well before the fires, and now it appears they're coming back into California, which is what you want from these companies. Many insurers said that they were discontinuing coverage to some of the people that they covered. They're called non-renewals. If you got a non-renewal notice in the past 3 months, the state is saying there's a moratorium on those, that you will get another year, you'll get an extension on your coverage. So what that means is that could be somebody who was not directly affected by the fires, but was affected by what insurance is doing with the fires. Meaning, let's say you had a non-renewal that was coming up next month, right? And you needed to get insurance. Well, the market is such now that nobody's writing new policies. And if you can't get new insurance, even if you weren't affected by the fires, you were indirectly affected in that way. So that what Lara's doing, and why having an insurance commissioner is so important, is he's making sure that Californians are protected. So that is a bit of good news to hear about State Farm at a time when we need good news, and we also need good guests.
Yes.
Do you have one for me, Kim?
I have one. He's here.
I think you might. Okay. Let's, without further discussion, bring in David Katz. David, thanks for joining the show. Thanks for being with me again. We had a good time last time, and the simpler days of talking about Luigi Mangione and how things have changed since then, in terms of the seriousness of what we're dealing with on a political and I would say a societal level with the fires and what's happening here in Southern California. David, thanks for being on.
It's great to be with you. Hi, Kim.
And David, I trust you're safe and the people you love and care for are okay.
We had some major damage to our house, but and we're living in a hotel, but we're hanging in there. No injuries. No personal injuries.
No personal injuries is good to hear, and I hope, like with everybody else, that you're able to get out of it, and that had to have been terrifying. A different kind of terrifying. Let's talk about what we're hearing in these confirmation hearings from some of these nominees. And I ask you, an accomplished, decorated lawyer and attorney, the Attorney General nomination of Pam Bondi. Let's start there, because that would be appropriate with you. What have you heard and what you've read and seen from Pam Bondi? Is there anything that surprised you, either for the better or the worse?
Well, I'm not really that encouraged. She's, sort of a typical, what you expect kind of from Trump. She's not Matt Gaetz. But she is someone who seems to be totally under his thumb, under his sway. She was the Attorney General of the state of Florida. She was going to she was going to investigate the Trump school, that turned out to be this flim-flam school of Trump's, where he had to pay $25 million in fines. And the question was, what states were going to investigate it? Was Florida going to be one of the ones that would investigate Trump University? She took a large campaign donation. She backed off. She seemed to be currying favor with him when she was in public office. The idea of having someone who's the head of the Department of Justice, who has a record of basically currying favor with very rich, powerful people who are under prospect of prosecution, that's, of course, not what we want in the rule of law. But I guess about all you can say about Bondi is that, she could have been worse. It could be Gates. I could think of some other people. Remember, he had an acting attorney general. He had that fellow Jeffrey Clark. So that is my praise for her, my dim praise of her, that she's not Matt Gaetz. She's not Jeffrey Clark.
Right. Somebody yesterday I heard on the radio saying it wouldn't have made a difference if it was Pam Bondi or Matt Gaetz. And
that's not true.
And I don't think that's true. And I don't think that's true either. But they were making, a sort of a cerebral argument as to why that Bondi is somebody who has always and continued in places where she could actually give positive influence to Donald Trump, has always done that, has always deferred to that, has always protected him, has always been a denier of the election of 2020. And the argument was that Gaetz has not always done that, but also doesn't have that history with Trump, only as a member of Congress and liking him and supporting him, but also being from the 1st District of Florida, where that is something that just about everybody does. So, but there is a difference, right? There's definitely a difference.
My take on the difference between her and him, she's sort of an institutionalist. She's run for office. She held a serious job, not being from like the most right-wing congressional district, but, she had a serious job where she held statewide office. She had a lot of responsibilities to follow the rule of law. I'm, very dim on how she treated Trump and that she gave favoritism to Trump. But I think in general, she's someone who didn't want to, who was cautious, who was a careful state elected prosecutor, I think, for a couple of terms. Gaetz, I had the feeling, would do things, even if he knew he was going to get caught, even if they were going to look outrageous in the annals of history, he would do them. You know what I mean? He was one of those people who wanted to, make a splash, who wanted to show that he was a defier. And he would railroad somebody, and the whole world knew that he was railroading them, and it was because of their political purposes, and there'd be documents to prove that the person was being railroaded. There'd be a good motion for selective prosecutions that, like, a Republican-appointed judge would take seriously. And Gaetz was the sort of person who would ruin someone's life with that. I don't think that Bondi would do anything like that. But I think when push comes to shove, there's a huge investigation of Elon Musk's company. There's a huge investigation of somebody who's a loyalist of Trump, that she's a loyalist of Trump. And so, of course, I'm queasy about it. This is what the Democrats said. They said this about Holder. They said that, Holder wasn't going to really zealously represent somebody who was in the tank with Obama. I didn't believe it in those situations. I thought Holder was trying to do his job fairly. And I may be pleasantly surprised that she performs her duty fairly. But I think she has a goal of being perceived as performing it fairly, with the soft spot when it comes to Trump and the Trump loyalists. I think Gaetz, as I say, would have been a defier. He would have been a performance artist. It would have been a clown show. And to have someone like that as the head of DOJ or head of the FBI, which is Kash Patel, that's the one that everyone's horrified about. The Bondi hearings were interesting because they said, would you rein in Kash Patel? You wouldn't do things like Kash Patel would do. And so one of the Republicans, to try to defend Bondi, said, well, you see, they're not really upset about you. They're upset about Kash Patel. So people are mildly upset about Bondi, and they're outrageously upset about Kash Patel, who has a stated record that he wants to, he's got a book, I think, called Government Gangsters. He's going to show who all the government gangsters are. What he calls government gangsters are office holders who happen to be of the other party. So it's very terrifying. And of course, they're, quote, enemies of Trump. People like, Senator Adam Schiff, who as a Congress member performed his duty and excellently to present the impeachment case to the Senate against Trump. That's a patriot. Either side of the aisle should see that as being a patriot, not at all how Kash Patel sees it.
Yeah, and David, so you brought up some things that I want to ask about. Kash Patel could still have a rough road, especially as we've seen what looks like these people sailing through. And, this is when it's most intense, right? In these confirmation hearings, we saw it with Brett Kavanaugh most recently. We see it with these, with the new administration coming in, and then it ends. And then these people, wake up one morning and they go to work at the Justice Department or at the Supreme Court or what have you. And we judge them on the work ahead, not what they've done behind. What kind of recourse is there to an attorney general run amok? We know we don't have that with the Supreme Court, but is there any, is there something that will get people upset about an attorney general enough? I mean, I know Watergate aside, where we saw that happen, but is there something that can happen here?
No, I don't really think so. I think an attorney general has a huge amount of power. You know, people have sort of this view of the attorney general from the special prosecutor cases. I mean, that's what especially viewers of this show, people who are sort of legal, political aficionados have been watching, is obviously the special prosecutor, you know, Jack Smith. But the reality of what the Department of Justice does, I don't want to bore people, but if you just give me 1 minute on this.
So no, you're not boring anybody. I think this is fascinating stuff.
There are 94 U.S. attorneys around the country. Basically, the country is divided geographically into 94 districts. And they always have these strange names because it's not how we tend to think of our geography. There's the Southern District of New York. That's Manhattan and the Bronx, Westchester. There's the Eastern District of New York. That's Brooklyn, Queens, and Long Island. There's the Central District of California. We don't think of ourselves as central. People always think, oh, so you were a prosecutor out there in Fresno? No, the Central District of California is the hugest one in the country. It's bigger than either New York district. But we're in central over here. And then, you know, the Bay Area is northern. And then San Diego, because it's south of us, is southern. So there are these 94 districts around the country. And then each one has a presidentially appointed U.S. attorney. Now, they're all going to leave probably in the next week. Some of them who may be slow to leave may get fired every 4 years or so, every 8 years. We have some controversy about some U.S. attorney who doesn't leave. And the U.S. attorney can stay on if the U.S. attorney isn't fired. And there are some famous people who did that, like the one in Delaware, who stayed on. He was, quote, left over from Trump. Biden kept him on for the appearance of fairness. And he's the one who right now, Weiss, is prosecuting the Biden group, including a fellow, this informant who blew up and turned out not to be the smoking gun, but turned out to be a lying gun. He just got sentenced to about 5 or 6 years here in the Central District of California. The prosecutor on his case was Weiss, left over from Trump the first time around. But generally speaking, they all go. I got my nice little invitation to go to the going away party of our U.S. attorney out here, which will be next Thursday. And probably by the end of next week, pretty much all of the U.S. attorneys, all 94, will be gone. And then there'll be somebody from, quote, the deep state, as Trump would say it, who's going to run those offices. And I don't think it's going to make very much difference in how the offices run. And that's normally somebody who's either been brought in by the politically appointed U.S. attorney, or it's someone who's worked their way up in the ranks to be the chief assistant in the office. So what's going to happen until all of those U.S. attorneys are confirmed around the country is that those offices are going to be run basically by a careerist, someone who I think we can all trust to make good decisions. And then, of course, to become a U.S. attorney, you do have to get by the Judiciary Committee, which Adam Schiff is on now, and some very, very able Democrats are on now. But of course, they don't have the votes. If every Democrat votes no and every Republican on the Judiciary Committee votes yes, they advance that candidate, including for U.S. attorney around the country, up to the full House, the full Senate. And of course, the Senate's 53-47, so expect confirmation. And then just one last thing is that within justice itself, it's not just these 94 U.S. attorneys around the country. They have divisions. One of them is called the Criminal Division. And they do these big cases in Washington, and they exercise some supervisorial control over the 94 U.S. attorneys and agencies. And they're called the Criminal Division. They're in Washington in Main Justice. There's a Civil Division. So like the medical abortion pill, that was a huge civil case, suing over some of these things like in Baltimore, where they destroyed the bridge. And then the government went and sued. That's the Civil Division. They're a big deal. There's a Tax Division, which people heard about because Biden met with the head of the Tax Division. On my cases, I do a lot of these federal criminal income tax cases. I meet with, when it's worthwhile, I meet with the Tax Division. They're another agency in Washington, D.C. And then there's kind of lands, natural resources, and of course, there's civil rights. That's the group that goes around the country and brings these cases about police, different police forces, whether they're violating the civil rights laws of the country. You hear about them a lot. They're very controversial. The police departments generally scream and yell, say they don't need this kind of supervision. And here comes the civil rights from Washington. So that's Washington, D.C. That's the 94 U.S. attorneys around the country. And then there's a very small structure above all of them, who's the attorney general, the deputy attorney general, and then basically the people who run these divisions. The person who runs criminal cases, the person who runs civil cases. It's not a hands-on kind of running of them. But what you worry about is that when it's something like a politician, that goes way up very fast. And so they can open up an investigation or approve the prosecution of a politician. And of course, we always think about, oh my God, and it seems to happen more with the Republicans, Michael, that they go after their political enemies. The joke about the Democrats is they go after their political friends. And so when Carter was in power and he had the Abscam investigation, I think he picked 6 Democratic Congress members and only 1 Republican. So it's like, that's great, Jimmy. That's great, Jimmy. But of course, that was Jimmy Carter. If 7 of them were guilty, 7 of them were going to be charged. And if 6 of them were Democrats, well, so be it. That was the rule of law. And if you look at under Biden, for instance, I don't think you could really say that there's been any, this weaponization of the Department of Justice is total garbage. It's total nonsense. It's all Trump's rhetoric that he doesn't like the fact that he was righteously prosecuted in 2 very good cases that he managed to delay, and now they won't see the light of day. If you look at the, quote, weaponization of the Department of Justice against Republicans, no. Who are the Republicans? Who are the Republicans in trouble? Very few. Who are the Democrats in trouble under this so-called Democratic weaponization of the Department of Justice? The mayor of New York City is under indictment. Whatever he likes to say right now that somehow he was targeted, he's a Democrat. He's a Democratic office holder. Do I believe that he got picked because he gave him a hard time about they should pay more for the bus loads of immigrants that were going into New York? No, I don't believe it. I'm a criminal defense attorney, but at least right now, I don't believe it. I think that he was righteously selected for prosecution because he's way too close to a lot of influence peddlers, and he sold his influence. That's what I believe. That's what the allegations are. He's a Democrat. Look all around the country. You look at Los Angeles, the Democratic attorney general, the Democratic U.S. attorney who's going to leave this next week. Who did he charge out here? He charged a bunch of Democratic office holders. And the reason that he charged Democratic office holders is they were doing corrupt things. They were taking money in exchange for influence. They were approving zoning changes because people were paying them off. They were taking trips to Las Vegas that were part of being bribed. And those people are in prison right now. And guess what? They're Democrats. So what you worry about, though, is that is not that this whole projection with Trump, that the projection is, yes, there could be political persecution by the attorney general. Yes, there very much could be. And there hasn't been by Biden. And we're really worried that it's another projection by Trump, because that's what Trump figures. My God, without much power and without guardrails, that's what I do. I try to put all my enemies in jail. They say bad things about me. I want to see them in prison.
I don't know why. Can you hear me, David Katz?
Yeah, I hear you.
Awesome.
I don't hear Michael, though. I don't hear Michael.
We lost his sound for just a second, so I don't know what happened there. But while we wait for him to get that fixed up,
You're fearless producer and I. How you doing?
Do you hear me now, guys? Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Were you going to say something, Kim, though?
Only that. Oh, I'm echoing here. Rain says, so sorry to hear about the damage to your house, David Katz, sending you positive thoughts. So that was nice.
Well, Thank you very much, Rain. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry to hear it too, and I'm glad you're safe.
I appreciate those expressions of sympathy. And yes, it was terrifying the night that happened, Tuesday night, with that 100-mile-an-hour howling wind that came through the hills of Sherman Oaks.
Yeah, just horrendous. But glad again you're okay. I want to ask you a conjecture question. We have 4 more days of the Biden presidency, basically. Do you expect some blanket pardons of people, like preemptive pardons of people who may be targets? You brought up Senator Schiff, but there are others out there. Do you expect that to come down in the next several days?
Well, I'm running this great streak of predictions that have come out. And I always say I'm going to risk it. And then I pretty much predicted TikTok in the U.S. Supreme Court, how I think that's going to come out. Almost all the commentators agreed with me after they heard the argument. And of course, that they let Trump go ahead and be sentenced in the state court in New York. I predicted that the U.S. Supreme Court would allow that. So I'm going to now probably blow my streak by saying that I do believe Biden is going to issue some preemptive pardons. These are the kinds of pardons that President Ford issued for President Nixon. Nixon hadn't been charged with anything, and yet preemptively, he gave him a pardon. So if they started to criminally investigate Nixon or bandy about, the FBI did, an investigation of him that would end up in him being in prison, he could say, no, I have a pardon. I have a pardon. It's filed. It's official. You have to leave me alone because I've been pardoned. And I think that Biden is going to give some of these people that are on the known enemies list of Trump and Patel, I think he's going to give them preemptive pardons. And I think, Michael, what he's going to say is this. This is what I would do. And suppose he gave his farewell address, but there's no stopping him doing this if he wants to do it. Show the clip of Trump saying, I want to see Lynn Cheney in front of a firing squad. Show Patel saying, I'm going to go after people who are political enemies of Trump's. Don't take my word for it. Biden would say, here's the clip. Here's the specific threat. The remedy for this is to not have the person spend $1 million because Trump and Patel have made clear they will not observe the rule of law. I will give them something so they don't need to hire a lawyer. They don't need to be financially devastated by the investigation that can be opened of them. And I think he will give preemptive pardons to certain key people who Trump has made clear he wants to ruin their life. He can't convict them of anything. Lynn Cheney hasn't done anything wrong whatsoever. It's literally trumped up what he's talking about. But I think that not all these people are rich. Not all these people have super rich friends like Trump does. Some of them have indicated, Michael, that they don't want a pardon. Senator Schiff is one who said, I don't want a pardon. Senator Schiff also is someone who can tap into, if he needs to, a very large fundraising effort to make sure he doesn't have to mortgage his house in order to pay his legal bill. But you can think of a dozen or 2 dozen people on that list of people specified by Trump that he would ruin their life economically, even though at the end of the day, he and Patel wouldn't prove them guilty of anything. And let me just go to Patel really quickly. The reason that the FBI is so scary, there's all these FBI agents around the country in different offices like the U.S. Attorney's offices. And then there's all of these people in the main FBI building, that very ugly building in Washington, D.C.
Right. Still named for J. Edgar Hoover, by the way.
Astonishing. So when the name changes, they can't call it Fort Bragg anymore, but they can call that building J. Edgar Hoover. I mean, he has a terrible record. He is like, there's like civil rights. You look up civil rights and there's a big red X right across it. When it goes anywhere near J. Edgar Hoover. I mean, just a terrible record of violating civil liberties, not starting with Martin Luther King Jr., but one of the worst examples of his violating civil rights was Martin Luther King. And of course, violating the wiretap laws and you name it, J. Edgar Hoover violated. But my point is that they can start an investigation on very flimsy grounds. Why the FBI opens an investigation of one person and not another person is so much discretion. And we all trust that, it's not going to happen to you and me because we live in a country of the rule of law. Why on earth would they do that? We're not a part of any criminal organization. There's no there that they're likely to get. But if somebody with terrible judgment at the FBI decides to do that, there are very little constraints on that. And that alone, if you start to hear that drumbeat that those kinds of things are going on, you start to spend a lot of money on a criminal defense attorney like me or somebody else, and it's out of your pocket. And it can be financially ruinous, of course, reputations. People think you're under FBI investigation. How many people in America, now, of course, there's an exception now with Trump and Patel, but most people think, wow, the guy's being investigated by the FBI. He must have done something wrong. That is unfortunately human nature, even though we have the presumption of innocence. So this is very, very scary. The Patel thing is very, very scary. And the last thing was that the job was not open. They had to oust the 10-year term guy. And of course, this is the end of the 10-year term. The Democrats will be seen as the biggest milquetoast of all time if once they get power back, and I think it'll be in 4 years. It has to be a job that goes with the president now. The director of the FBI has to be, if the Democrats are in, it's a Democrat, and then when the Republicans come to power, they put their Republican director in there. But, Biden went for that farce that it really was a 10-year term. And neither time did Trump and the Republicans respect that it's a 10-year term. They ousted Comey during his 10-year term, and now they've ousted Wray, another Republican, during his 10-year term. And last thing on the FBI, there has never been a Democratic head of the FBI. You can look it up. From J. Edgar Hoover right on down, there's never been a Democratic head of the FBI director.
No, that's incredible. I believe you, and I didn't know that, and I heard people talk about a 5-year term so that it would extend past and seem less political past a presidential term.
Oh, Michael, this drives me crazy too, because Biden is such an institutionalist. He's such a good guy that he bought into that. And so he left a lot of these inspectors general in office. Okay. Trump, as soon as they do something he doesn't like, they're going to be one head after the other is going to be chopped off if he doesn't just, chop them all off right now, just because why should I be stuck with these people? They're not my Mar-a-Lago people. They're all Biden people. They're all appointed by Biden, which, as you say, was exactly the idea. But if you remember, through this amazing concatenation of circumstances, one chance in 5 million, this incredibly intensive IRS audit was done on both Comey and the guy right under it, Andrew Adam.
McCabe,
right. They got rid of his pension like the day before it vested. He had to sue to get it back. They did everything to ruin that guy's life. Those guys, you won't believe the coincidence. Both of those, one chance in 5 million, got picked by the IRS commissioner appointed by Trump for this incredibly intensive IRS audit, okay? And of course, the inspector general looked at it because it sure looked anomalous on the face of it, and he was someone from Bush, right? Or he's someone from Trump. I'm sorry. He was someone left over from Trump. And Biden says he's decided there was no monkey business, so there must have been no monkey business. Right. You and I are looking at that and saying, wow, Biden, you really do believe in this idea of these overlapping terms. And he was like, well, and I kept saying, who is this inspector general? I wasn't impressed with this report or what he had to say or anything like that. And then I saw the guys from Trump. I saw that this exonerated what Trump's IRS commissioner had done. By the way, I cannot making this stuff up. Trump's IRS commissioner lives in one of his properties.
So good. It's so good. Just you can't make that up. I don't know what your time is like. I don't want to let you go without talking to you about Jack Smith very briefly and what becomes of what we know now. If it's nothing, it's depressing to a lot of people. I know Arizona has requested that material. I don't know if they're going to get it. The Attorney General there has requested it. Tell me what you think is right or what's reasonable, what will happen.
Well, I'm sure I'm going to have a lot of controversy over this. And this is just, of course, like everything I say, just my personal opinion. But my personal opinion is that no state can really stand up to a sitting president. That's why I always thought that if Trump got reelected, one way or the other, that Atlanta case is going nowhere. And the New York case got done before he became a sitting president. So we didn't have that problem in New York. Yes. But you take and so the idea of a really vigorous prosecution of the sitting president of the United States by Arizona, I just don't see it. I think the chances for retaliation are so vast. I mean, even California right now, we want to stand up against some of these awful things that Trump has announced he's going to do. But we need money so bad. We've had such a disaster out here and everything else. And the reality, at some point, people will say, you know what, if we're prosecuting Trump for something he did some years ago, they have to let it go because we need billions and billions of dollars and Trump is in control. That's not the way the world ought to be.
I will say that there are 16 defendants in the Arizona case. So there's Mark Meadows and others. And those are the types of people that take the fall for a sitting president, as we've seen in Watergate, as we probably saw in Travelgate, et cetera, Whitewater. But do you think that the case is weakened by Trump not being part of it or in a way strengthened?
Well, I think it's certainly strengthened, Michael, in the sense that it would continue. But I think that the administration will do a lot of things. I mean, Trump wants to show loyalty. In this instance, they say loyalty is always a one-way street with Trump until it is no longer convenient for Trump. But it is convenient for Trump to show loyalty for those people and to really make those people's lives difficult in Arizona. And I don't think you can, gainsay the possibility that people who are trying to do their jobs down in Arizona in state court will be prosecuted federally. Someone's tax audit starts And one of the people trying to get Trump's Confederates down there in Arizona has a federal investigation, has a federal tax audit. And before you know it, it's like, okay, you want to play chicken with the president of the United States and all the federal agencies. And so I think that there is just a real tendency. And, you know, I think, let me just say this about the U.S. Supreme Court decision, which I didn't agree with the presidential immunity. But I think one thing that kind of brought it on, and no one did anything wrong. I understand everybody's emotions and intellectual analysis of it. But, and Mark was very sensitive to this too, and I think he probably took some criticism. But can 50 states really go after a former president of the United States? To me, it wasn't that troubling that the Department of Justice and Jack Smith, with all of the constraints on him and all the rules that he had to follow, and him being just such an impressive person intellectually and just everything about him. That was one thing to have him prosecuting former president of the United States, but to have 50 different states, right, mad at a former president, maybe over politics, be able to prosecute him, that disturbed the U.S. Supreme Court. I think it just did. They said, you know, unless the president has presidential immunity from criminal prosecution, how do we stop 50 different states and all the different prosecutors in them from making the life of a former president a mess? And you can imagine it right now that Biden's leaving office. You know, some county in Texas goes after Biden without that presidential immunity ruling, and it didn't need to be nearly as broad as it was. But without that presidential immunity ruling being out there, what does stop some county in Texas saying that, you know, he conspired to bring illegal aliens into their county and Biden should be prosecuted down? Well, the answer right now is that unbelievably, in my opinion, overbroad presidential immunity. But I think that that was kind of part of the yin and yang that ended up producing that really outrageous decision. Although, you know, Michael, one thing I said about it, there was a precedent sitting out there, and the left acted like it didn't exist, and the right, for their own reasons, didn't report it right. And I kept saying to people, the president, a former president, Michael, is immune from civil proceedings. There was a famous case called Fitzgerald v. Nixon. And this Fitzgerald, Nixon ruined his life. He drummed him out of the government. Fitzgerald had a totally righteous claim against Nixon. Nixon was the ex-president, and the Supreme Court ruled 5-4 that there was no civil liability by a former president. And I thought, my God, if a civil case can't be brought against a former president, even by someone who seems to have a very righteous claim, can a criminal prosecution be brought? And so I always thought it was a closer question whether we were going to have the presidential immunity case saying that former presidents were immune from criminal prosecution. I always thought it was more likely that the Supreme Court was going to do it, and it shouldn't be just dismissed, you know, intellectually, legally. It shouldn't be dismissed as, oh, there's no basis for this at all. This would be out of left field. What they had to do, what they did do, was extend Fitzgerald into the Trump case by just saying that, yes, for the same reasons that there ought to be immunity from civil cases, yes, there's an immunity for a former president for criminal cases, and especially since there were indeed brewing around the country these criminal cases in DA's offices and maybe in attorney general's offices in all these states that we have 50 of them. I thought that case was unfortunately likely to come out that way. I didn't think they were going to go quite that far that you couldn't even comment on anything that happened. This idea that you can't even bring into court or discuss at all that the president told some guy who was number 7 in the Department of Justice, I'm going to vault you over the other guys. I'm going to throw them out. I'm going to make you the acting attorney general, but you have to submit a memo that says there's fraud in Georgia, even though there is no fraud in Georgia. Just put out the memo as acting attorney general, and I'll have my Republican congressional hench people take it from there. I thought that shouldn't be immune, but there were some hard lines to draw there. So I think, and let me just say my last thing about Jack Smith is that I thought he was a wonderful public servant. I think that his record was almost faultless. I think he made one tactical mistake, which was to bring the Mar-a-Lago case, as it's been called. It was actually the taking of documents from the White House without authorization and then lying to the authorities in Washington, D.C., who were investigating the suspect. It was all centered in Washington, D.C. It should have been brought for venue in Washington, D.C. It would have been preserved for venue, and it could have gone to trial in Washington, D.C. But Jack Smith, I mean, making a tactical mistake is not any knock on his integrity or anything else. The one that made the huge mistake was Merrick Garland. And
of course,
history will note that he waited over 2 years to appoint a special prosecutor, and he almost gaslighted us. We all saw what happened on January 6th. We saw it on our TVs and on our mobile devices. We knew exactly what happened. We saw that Trump had sat there for over 3 hours, knowing that this marauding was taking place. And he waited to see if it worked out his way or not. He didn't try to take it down. In the midst of it,
had Doug Jones been the attorney general, it would have happened an hour after the inauguration. I mean, it felt like the deliberation was gaslighting is the exact right word. I don't like using it because I don't 100% know what it means, but I do think that it is. But I feel like that Merrick Garland is the one who let many of us down.
And it's really a pity. I knew him as a young lawyer. He was at the same law firm I was. And we represented big tobacco. People say, my goodness, how can you be a criminal defense attorney in all these cases where the government's saying your client is some sleazy tax cheat? And I said, I represented big tobacco. Once you represented big tobacco. But American I represented big tobacco at the same law firm in Washington, D.C. An incredibly talented lawyer. You look at his appellate decisions when he was the chief judge of the D.C. Circuit, really a legal genius. But I just don't think he was right for that job and for the decisiveness that it took in that moment.
Yeah, it was just too deliberate. Do you think this is like I say, this is a yes or no question?
Go for it, man. Go for it.
If, but it's not really. If Joe Biden were to pardon Donald Trump, what would that do? I mean, what would that do to the way we think about politics, and would it bring us together in a way if that was his intent?
I think there are going to be some preemptive pardons. I don't think that Trump's will be one of them. Trump would hold a speech almost immediately and say he didn't need a pardon. This was a piece of rubbish. This was an insult hurled at him by a guy on the way out.
As Gene Rayburn would say, that was the definitive answer right there. Yeah, there's no question. That is the right answer. But I hear people talking about it as, that would heal our nation. A lot of Republicans are saying that, preemptively pardon Donald Trump so that he wouldn't have to face anything. Well, the Supreme Court did it already. They already said he's not going to have to face anything.
But Michael, let me be a contrarian. Yeah. Being polarized is not the worst thing in the world. This idea of singing Kumbaya with people who don't have the same values, who don't believe in the rule of law, just want everything to be their way. I want to get along with them. Great. I always tell Mark, I'm the guy who's always on Fox and News Nation and stuff like that. Usually debating these people who are now, I know like half the people in the administration because I've debated them. I didn't debate Hegseth. He didn't have that kind of show. And I deeply resent the people who say he was just a weekend anchor. I was on with a lot of weekend anchors, and I still am, and bless the weekend anchors.
Bless the weekend. I was a weekend correspondent, by the way, for News Nation. And the weekend staff is real staff. And I'm glad. Personally,
we did a bit you can't believe. We did the debate before the debate where I played Waltz and one of the right wingers played Vance, and we went at it for about 8 minutes. And if I do say so myself, I think our debate was a little better than the debate.
I'm sure it was. I'm sure it was.
Playing Waltz, especially me playing Waltz.
That's great. All right. Well, David, I appreciate your time. I could talk to you all day long about this stuff. It's stuff that we both clearly like. And as to your last point, the division is good. It's also the people that say that we've never been this divided. We've always been divided. It's a way we never were, to think that we just had ever a kumbaya moment, whether it was with the fact that we had a civil war in this country or the notion that Bob Dole and George Mitchell got along like best friends on the floor of the Senate in the 80s. It just didn't happen. There's always been division, and you don't want to kowtow to the other side just to try and make a peace that wouldn't last, is my take on that. David Katz, thank you. I cannot wait till the next Thursday. I sit in this seat where Mark has a dentist appointment or something, and we can do this.
You're a great pinch hitter. I'm not just saying that, but you're a great pinch hitter.
Well, you're kind to say it. Thank you so much, David Katz. We thank you for your company, and I know the audience loves you because of the comments that we see here. So take care. Hope things are good at home soon, and you're able to get back home. So
thank you for saying that. I hope everyone out there is dealing with the situation, whether in Southern California or not. I know there's problems around the world, not just in Southern California, but we sure are taking it on the chin here.
Man, are we ever. Yep, I agree. All right, take care. We now, Kim, after that, fantastic. I love when David says, if I'm not boring you. Are you kidding me?
I know. He could say anything and I'd be riveted. I love it.
I totally agree. It's a great pleasure.
He's the best.
To sit and talk with him. But you are too. And I think you want to bring us a little bit of news now, don't you?
Oh, do you want some news? I can do that. Let's get it.
Well, I mean, we're closing down the shop pretty soon. Let's be a little informed.
On the Mark Thompson Show with Michael Schur filling in, I'm Kim McAllister, and this report is sponsored by CoachellaValleyCoffee.com. As mentioned, in Southern California, crews are battling 2 large wildfires in the Los Angeles area right now. They're still working on this. Winds in the region easing up a little bit today, thank goodness, giving crews a chance to make some more progress. The Palisades fire near the coast and the Eaton fire in and around Altadena and Pasadena have left thousands of homes and businesses destroyed. As mentioned earlier, State Farm will be offering policy renewals to homeowners who were impacted by these devastating wildfires in California. Wednesday's announcement comes after the insurance company previously announced plans to drop coverage. State Farm, one of the largest insurers here in California, the company says so far it has received more than 7,400 home and auto insurance claims connected to the wildfires. That number is expected to rise significantly in the coming days and weeks. The Israeli cabinet is planning to vote on a ceasefire and hostage deal with Hamas tomorrow. The vote will happen a day later than expected after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office accused Hamas of creating a last-minute crisis that is preventing an agreement. The Palestinian militant group made a ceasefire and hostage deal with Israel on Wednesday that would include Hamas releasing dozens of hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. Most of President-elect Trump's cabinet picks are undergoing Senate confirmation hearings today. Former North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum testified as he's been picked to lead the Department of the Interior. Former New York Congressman Lee Zeldin facing questions over his nomination to head up the Environmental Protection Agency. Are we still going to have an Environmental Protection Agency? I thought they were going to kill that agency.
Well, they're going to drill that agency. So
it's not. They're going to drill it up.
Yeah.
Inauguration day in Washington, D.C. will come with sunshine and below freezing temperatures. President-elect Trump will be sworn in during a cold January in a district that has included a few inches of snow, wind, and low temperatures. The National Weather Service forecasts Monday to be about 24 degrees. So, you know what that makes me think of? Not that anything bad is going to happen to the president-elect, but wasn't there a president who gave a really long speech?
Yeah, it was William Henry Harrison. Our ninth president gave a speech, and he died 6 weeks later from pneumonia contracted at his inauguration.
Thank you.
So that is, we don't wish that upon anyone. And
No.
There is now, guess what? There is now medicine, although, they're skeptics about medicine. So we'll see.
But it's gonna be cold, and we know Trump likes to talk a lot. So I'm just, hoping that he's safe and everything goes well.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. President-elect Trump is reportedly considering an executive order that would save TikTok from a ban or a sale. The Washington Post reports the order would suspend the enforcement of the TikTok ban or sale law for at least 60 to 90 days. Its aim is to buy the Trump administration some time to work out a sale or some other kind of solution. So, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis tapping his state's attorney general to fill Marco Rubio's U.S. Senate seat. Her name is Ashley Moody, pictured here, and she'll serve in the Senate until a special election is held next year. President-elect Trump selected Rubio to be his Secretary of State, which is why we have to have the fill-in. Young women are getting cancer diagnoses at almost twice the rate of young men. A new report from the American Cancer Society shows a change in diagnosis demographics. They are moving from older to younger adults and from men to women. Middle-aged women now have a slightly higher cancer risk than men their age. That did not used to be the case. In San Francisco, we've got a new mayor, Daniel Lurie, and he's trying to address the fentanyl crisis. Yesterday, Mayor Lurie introduced his first piece of legislation since recently taking office. The ordinance would allow the mayor to solicit donations from the private sector to tackle the issues of homelessness and fentanyl overdoses in San Francisco. Mayor Lurie says his ordinance cuts a lot of red tape, and it allows the mayor to move quickly to help those who might lean toward fentanyl use, like homeless and those with mental issues. Interesting that this is a man who is an heir to a fortune. He's done a lot of philanthropic work, but that would be his go-to is private money, and that's what he wants to go to as mayor as well. So
yeah, it's sort of the philanthropic mayoralty. Look, I mean, I can see giving anything a shot, right? There's desperation on these issues, and nobody through regular avenues has been able to curtail them. And for decades, I'm not talking about London Breed and Eric Garcetti and different mayors in different California cities. Nobody. I mean, they've tried everything. In New York, Ed Koch and Rudy Giuliani and Michael Bloomberg tried 3 different ways of curtailing homelessness, and then worked. So if it cuts red tape, as long as it's not extra constitutional, I think that these things, are worth trying. And if he has the ability to raise that money because of where he's from, well, having a wealthy mayor, that's when it should help, right? If you already have the wealthy mayor, let him tap into the wealthy donors.
Absolutely. I know you really are probably excited about this, Michael Schur. Progresso, the maker of canned soup. They're introducing a new way to enjoy soup. The company releasing its first ever limited edition.
Can I guess?
Okay, yeah, go please.
I was going to go with a bath, but no, soup drops. What is this?
It's candy. Yeah, Soup Drops candy. Progresso says it took the beloved flavors of their Progresso chicken noodle soup and packed them into a fun, savory candy. It's sold exclusively at progressosoupdrops.com. $2.50 a can. The first batch sold out, but more is expected to be released at 9 a.m. Eastern every Thursday in January, so you can get your soup drops.
That's amazing. Every Thursday in January. So when it's David Katz Day, we know that we can get soup that
drops.
Morning. So,
that's right.
Okay, my first take on this is, that sounds disgusting.
Right?
My second take is, when can I get some? I definitely want to try it because it sounds horrible, but I do want to try it for some weird reason.
Can you imagine sucking on chicken soup candy? No. Thanks.
Or imagine somebody's like, "Oh, do you have another one?" Like we blindly say if somebody's like sucking on a lifesaver, "Hey, do you have another one?" "Yeah, sure, here." And you give them a soup candy, a soup. They're like, "Whoa!" It's like Willy Wonka on steroids. Yeah, no, I like this.
No.
I mean, I don't like it. I haven't tried it, and I hate the idea of it, but I can't wait to try it. That's what I'm saying.
Get you some soup drops.
Yes.
What I would rather have is Coachella Valley coffee and tea. As a matter of fact, I've got my vanilla tea right here. This report sponsored by CoachellaValleyCoffee.com. It is all organic, fresh coffee beans, the most amazing tea, all sourced from women-owned farms, Coachella Valley Coffee. It's located in, of course, the Coachella Valley, but you can go online and you can get it sent anywhere. And I'm telling you, the tea is amazing. Mark says the coffee is the best he's ever had. Check it out at CoachellaValleyCoffee.com. And if you do find something that you're interested in, when you get to the checkout, there's a little code box, and you can get the exclusive Mark Thompson Show discount by entering Mark T, M-A-R-K-T, Mark T, all together at checkout. You get your 10% off, and it's always so exciting to click apply and see that money fly off the total at the end. And then a couple days later, you get your CoachellaValleyCoffee.com order. And I will say, it's always kind of a surprise because they often will put something in the box that is a little extra, even if it's a little note. They're just really nice. So check it out, CoachellaValleyCoffee.com. And our thanks to Coachella Valley Coffee for sponsoring the newscast here on The Mark Thompson Show.
Thank you, Kim. I'm guessing you have a mug into which to pour your...
I have to tell you, I do not.
You don't even have a mug.
I don't have a Mark Thompson Show mug. Yeah,
my outrage is really, I shouldn't be outraged then.
You're just more vocal about it. I am. I think I'm going to order my own mug. I'm going to order the chit mug. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you shouldn't have to order your own mug, nor should I. And you get better than I do. So I have no mug mercy for you. I still have mug mercy for me. Let's revisit. Luis said, "Hey, Michael, that Thompson kid is great. Can you find a regular spot for him on the show? He may be on his way to huge soda status." Oh, Luis, Mark is already a huge soda. Thank you for the $4.99. And again, later he came back, but man, he is a huge soda. He came back with Carrie Underwood, Kid Rock, and that cop from the Village People. What a stellar lineup for the inauguration. Yours truly, decades past. Yeah. Those are some of your performers at the inauguration, and I hope that Jeff Bezos enjoys the Kid Rock concert. The show was great today. Thank you to Kim and Tony. And tomorrow we have politics. I'm going to try and get somebody in Washington to join us to talk about what it's been like on the ground for those confirmations and ahead of the inauguration. And any other things you would like to talk about tomorrow, we'll be happy to do it. Thank you. It's one more day this week. Tomorrow will be my last Mark Thompson show in the Biden administration. Kind of weird. I know.
That's hard to hear.
It is hard to hear. Mm-hmm. Tony, Kim, thank you for everything. Thanks for watching today. We will be back right here tomorrow, a few minutes late, because that's what the people want. You give the people what they want.
Bye, everybody. Bye-bye.